open conversations on weaknesses and strengths in rare disease is important to have. My experience as a nurse brings a lot of information on the gaps and the lack of resources and safety nets that we have for rare disease. I was told in the beginning that I couldn't get pregnant and I had to go through IVF. And I had what was called premature ovarian failure. I had no eggs. And Penelope was my only egg that made it. And we paid out of pocket $20,000 for genetic testing. And they found that we were carriers of cystic fibrosis. And so they tested and they found, oh, she doesn't have cystic fibrosis, this will be okay. And this was years of me trying to conceive. The day she was born, I remember turning to my husband and saying, I don't ever have to cry ever again. You know, she's absolutely perfect. 8 days later came the worst day of my life, the worst day of my life. We went to the doctor and she explained to me that she had this thing called galactosemia, classic galactosemia, where actually if I did IVF in New York, they would have tested it and I would have been aware and created early intervention then. So our pediatrician had no idea about classic galactosemia. She didn't understand it. She really went to the idea that this is probably a false positive because it's so rare. It's in the ultra rare category. And I brought her in and my baby was like a quiet baby. I was a new mom. I didn't really understand, but I was a nurse and I knew she was really jaundiced. So I brought her in and she had an assessment and I remember the nurse kind of having this reaction. And I'm a nurse, you don't have any reactions. You don't have reactions unless something's wrong. And I should have paid attention then. The doctor said, just change her over to soy formula, go home, this is gonna be fine, she's gonna be fine. An hour later, she was dying in my arms in my home. It was traumatic. I had to become my daughter's nurse and rush her back to the hospital she was born at. It was the closest hospital at the time. And I knew waiting for EMT, it just wasn't gonna work. So we just went and I took care of her in the back seat. And I remember going into the hospital and telling them she has no pinch response, there's nothing going on and I'm pinching her. And you're the one being rushed back and there's tons of people in the waiting room. You don't wanna be that person who's rushed back. We went back there and they said that we don't know about this. You have to be transported to the next closest children's hospital, which is Joe DiMaggio. On the way there, she crashed a couple of times and it was a 30-minute drive. It was awful. We got there and I kept asking, is she gonna survive? Is she gonna survive? And they said, we can't tell you this because it's been going on for so long, her body's shutting down. I just wanna show you this. This is me, I took this picture. I thought this was gonna be the last picture I ever took of her. She was dying. And
it's beautiful.
It's really important, this picture, like, I really, like, I thought this would be my last picture. This is my only picture with my baby. And we met a geneticist. His name is Dr. Binky. He's amazing. He saved her life. He said she has classic galactosemia. There's no doubt she has classic galactosemia, but she has to fight, and she has to fight to get through this. There's nothing I can say or do at this time that's going to help pull her through. And she made it, and we spent the next year learning about rare disease, just being overwhelmed by it. I got depressed. I had a lot of PTSD. I had panic attacks over, like, I'm a nurse, so you know all the things like that can happen. So that kind of precursors a lot of that anxiety to begin with. So that was year 1. Year 2, we found out that she was having seizures. Year 3, we found out she has another rare condition called Chiari malformation, and she had to have emergent decompression brain surgery in that week that we found out. And what was grateful about Chiari malformation and brain surgery, how could you be grateful for brain surgery, is that they had a solution. Classic galactosemia does not have a solution. And I know there's a lot to this, but there's the story is like really important because there's a lot of pivotal times where she could have had early intervention and she didn't. It took us a year to find out that she had Chiari malformation. It took that long for me to get an MRI, where most people, you get an MRI right away. So during that year, she was vomiting every single day. Up until that last week, she was vomiting and she actually stopped walking. And during that stay, she had a medication error. The medication error was that they gave her something called lactulose. And they don't have a system in place to say she's allergic. I don't know if I explained galactosemia. Galactosemia is a buildup of milk sugars. And so any milk that she has, it's more like a diabetic. So if you give diabetic tons of sugar, they can't process it and becomes toxic. Their eyes, their kidneys, their heart, all their organs are affected. Their brain, they tend to go into comas if their blood sugars are too high. So it's kind of parallel, not necessarily the same thing. It's different medically and scientifically in the Krebs cycle. But I remember pulling the doctor aside after I found out that they were giving her lactulose. I questioned it. The nurse was like, "No, there's no milk in it." And literally what lactulose is milk sugar. It's lactulose sugar that helps you go to the bathroom. And I sat down and talked to the doctor, and he said there's no electric medical record that can explain the type of allergy that she has. So every time you go somewhere, you have to be the advocate and say, and question, because everybody's used to the medical records and thinking that that's going to be the safety net, where the doctor orders it. Doctor knows the disorder. The nurse looks at it. Then the pharmacy looks at it. And they all have places where they could say, okay, there's peanuts in this, but for a rare disease like galactose and lactose, they always assume that it's a lactose intolerance that just causes diarrhea. So they prescribe it anyway. Even to the point where Walgreens can't even tell me what's in the ingredients. I actually have to call the manufacturer to see what is in this medication. My daughter's been struggling with ear infections for the last year, and I have to actually research myself, and thank God I'm a nurse and I can get through. I have just felt really buried and invisible, and there's just a lot of things that I'm like, there's so many places where we could have early intervention. And there's a couple of bills. I'm sorry if I'm like all over the place, but...
No, you're doing great. You did a really good explanation. And I feel like I definitely have more information about what this is already. So. And
even like 10 years ago, when I was a new nurse, one of my first patients was a rare disease child. And I was talking to the mother, and the mother lost her first child because they didn't screen for it. And usually what happens is within 24 hours, they go into heart failure and die. And this kid had a rare disease, and I could see all the stress that this mom was going through. She had to bring in her own medication. The facility didn't have it, so we become the experts in the room. We need to utilize early interventions, and we need to improve patient outcomes for rare disease. And I find that you have this mix of, I need to touch your heart, but I also need to touch your mind intellectually. Like, why is it good to support rare diseases? And there's a ton of benefit when you support rare diseases. How many people do you know have speech issues, or someone has a stroke with aphasia, or they're going through IVF, they have infertility issues? All of these issues, when they're directed at like a rare gene or a specific gene, you can find solutions that will help other populations. Penelope's 70% of her community will have speech issues. So the Arizona University set up a speech program to do early interventions at 3 months. This isn't just to benefit rare disease, but all kids who have speech issues. They're trying to prove that from the very beginning, you need early intervention. So even with that said, like a lot of diabetics, a lot of people with sugar issues will benefit from research with classic lactosemia because a lot of them parallel. And milk sugars, if you can control that, you can help control a diabetic's milk sugar issues because they can't, milk sugar is the same thing to them. So there is one thing that I would really like for people to look into because I know money kind of talks, but they did a study, and the study is from the Everyday Life Foundation, but there's also another woman who did a study separate from this that proved that the economic burden of rare diseases in the United States is $1 trillion. And if we had early interventions and things in place, we could save money, not necessarily spend more money. If we improve some of the things that we already have, like a newborn screening that was told to me that was a false positive, how many times does that happen where you just don't believe it because it's so rare that this actually would happen? And that study only included 398 rare diseases. There's 7,000. So imagine that and, quadruple it. Like that's a lot of money that could be saved if we're helping rare disease. Rare disease is also hit with a lot of misdiagnosis, late diagnosis, medical errors. Medical errors is the leading cause of accidental death. It's a $14.1 billion cost to the US. And it takes on average 7 years for a complete diagnosis. And in that time, I heard a story where children come out with their feet clubbed and they do surgery, bunion surgery. And it's actually that does not help. It actually makes it worse. And if they had the appropriate screening at that time for genetic testing, there's a bill that it's called the Precision Medication Answers for Kids Today Act. It hasn't been passed yet, but what it does is it's going to be a demonstrative program of when a newborn screening comes up as positive, they're going to select 15 states that go to this application where they will provide genetic testing and genetic counseling right away when a newborn screening is positive. And I definitely advocate that the state of Florida apply for that when it does get passed, because it's going to provide the cost. And I also participated in the Rare Disease Advisory Council of Florida. They're new and they have a lot going on. I tried to tell them, but I was only given 2 minutes of my time to speak to them. That program needs a lot of assistance as well. They are lacking. I did not feel like I was heard. I was given a whole spiel about, oh, we would love to have you. We would love to hear from you. And 2 minutes, I was able to not even introduce myself or my daughter, but pretty much say, I want these 3 bills. That's it. And then they cut me off. And I get that their time is valuable and they have their stuff that they're doing, but I'm in the system. I know what's not working.
Let me really quickly ask
Go ahead.
you, do you happen to know the bill number for the one you just mentioned? I just want to make sure
Which
I
one?
write it down.
It is HR.
So, the precision.
Yes,
Okay.
it's HR 5989, Precision Medicine Answers for Kids Today Act.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll write that down so I have.
And I
that to
believe
reference.
Representative Salwell is the one who is providing that.
Okay, perfect.
There is listen, I have like a stack of things that can improve rare disease. And one of the other things that I'm dealing with right now is Penelope is in a drug trial called AT007. And Applied Therapeutics created this medication, and your own body actually produces galactose. So even with a dairy-free diet, it's a progressive disease. And that's why, she's starting to have seizures. She started to have tremors, speech delays. They continue on. And a lot of adults are actually in group homes. So AT007, the biomarker data, has proven that it decreases galactose levels in patients by 50%. The FDA has said this information isn't enough for accelerated approval. And it's very disappointing because it's a double-blind placebo trial. As of August last year, my daughter couldn't really talk. She couldn't hold a pencil. She couldn't draw. Like, she's 4. So normal things that a 4-year-old could do. She didn't have balance. She didn't have coordination. We were in discussions with our IEP meeting that we're probably going to hold back from kindergarten and do a lot more intervention in the pre-K stages. She just wasn't ready. Fast forward today, she's on a bike. She is drawing up a storm. She has no more tremors. She does not shut up and will talk to me all day long. And the FDA in the 21st Century Cures Act in Title 3, Section 3001, 2, 3, and 4, all talk about patient experience and that they have a patient-focused drug development in place. And the 21st Century Act says that right there. And if you Google PFDD, there's tons of articles saying, oh, this is great, we're doing a great job, we're helping facilitate. And I'm in a drug trial. I called FDA and they said, we're not allowed to talk about it to you. I asked for a PFDD meeting. They said, I'm sorry, but this is proprietary information. We cannot talk to you about this. It's in there, but they're not doing anything and they're not accountable. And I think it's more of like a suggestion. And the thing is that PFDD data helps to progress the drug development into approval because it includes the patient experience. And for me, I'm watching other moms who are in the drug trial and they see no change. And it's very clear, we all know who's on the drug and who's not on the drug. And they've continued this double-blind placebo. And I have other mothers that I'm talking to that are in tears because every day this disease progresses and does damage to the brain. And this is one of those things. This is an early intervention that will help quality of life in ways that other people would take for granted. You know, like just my 4-year-old riding a bike. Like, it brings me to tears, you know, that she's able to do something like that. It's just extraordinary. So we're stuck in this thing, and there's, let me just pull up. I have a couple of acts here.
While you're doing that, I'll tell Alexandria that is HR 4472. HR 4472.
Oh, you're so good. You're so on it. And that's called the Benefit Act. And the Benefit Act will include in the 21st Century Cures Act by requiring the FDA to share how patient experience and PFDD data was considered, and within the risk-benefit assessment for any approved therapies. This will provide additional learnings to all stakeholders, particularly patients, to help further refine and develop tools going forward. They're using it, and there's ways to quantify patient experience. They can create surveys, but the fact that it's there but it's not implemented is very frustrating. There's also the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Reauthorization Act. That's I think HR 482/S350. It explains itself. You know, you need newborn screening. I think that it needs to be facilitated in a better, timely manner because the way my daughter's was handled, it was sent to the doctor late. They told me it was because it was the weekend that they somehow don't do testing on Sunday. So it was late then. And the whole point of a newborn screening is that it provides early intervention and it saves lives. And then the doctor got it, but she had no idea what galactosemia was. and they need to have some sort of education on newborn screening and what's there. And I get that there's like 50 some odd, but there has to be, and I probably have to go more to the medical fields and provide more standards of care when it comes to newborn screening. That's on another day. But I just have.
Thankfully, we'd like to thank Representative Soto in voting me for that. That one passed.
Okay, sorry.
Knowing though, but Jillian, I mean, you're right. It needs to always be at the forefront of our mind, and especially if it doesn't get passed through the Senate this year, right? We're doing it again. So this is always good to keep on top of mind.
And I don't know if I talked about the STAT Act, but the STAT Act also will help provide disease patient access to FDA-approved therapies in both public and commercial plans, enhance FDA Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Service Coordination. They also do have, within the FDA, they would like to set up a rare disease center of excellence where their main goal is to help people with rare disease. They have one for oncology, and they've produced great results for cancers in the United States.
But thank you so much for sharing, Jillian. And how old is your daughter now?
She is 4, and I have a picture of her, and she is just like so much fun. She's so much fun. So much fun. She still believes in magic, so like I'm hoping some magic can happen today.
I believe in Good. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. I know we can read about this stuff all we want, but when we actually hear it from real people and their real families, that's what really makes a difference. So thank you, Jillian. Does anyone else want to talk about